All right, welcome everybody to today's webinar. I'm going to give just another minute or two for everyone to jump in and then we can get started. So we'll just hang tight here, but really excited to have Michael Fulwiler with us for today's special webinar.
Excited to be here.
Absolutely.
And I did just post a welcome in the Q&A. So if y'all want to say who you are, where you're from, where you're tuning into today, feel free. There will be a Q&A, so feel free to familiarize yourself with that section while we wait on some other folks to join.
Sure. Well, it'll take a minute just to go through some of the housekeeping things. So I see a few more still jumping in, but we can kind of go ahead and get started with the intro since I know we got a lot of good content. But just to get started, I am Barrett Merrill. I am the head of marketing here at Checkpoint. I know Katie, who's on here with us, she facilitates a lot of these, but excited to jump in and join for this specific webinar. Head of marketing here at Checkpoint. For those, I know there's some Checkpoint customers coming in and there's just some different folks who are joining as well. If you are unfamiliar with Checkpoint, we are a behavioral health EHR system. We really kind of focus on the billing and reporting side of things.
Do we lose Barrett there?
Oh,
particular webinar today. Just a couple housekeeping things as we get started. So everyone, as you come in, you will be muted, but your cameras are enabled. So please, if you're able to, we'd love to see your beautiful faces. Turn on your cameras. This is going to be an interactive webinar throughout, chances for Q&A throughout, and then questions at the end. So definitely, if you're able to, cameras on, but if not, totally no worries at all. Again, Q&As, the Q&A and the chat are both going to be enabled, so feel free to drop in questions and comments throughout. And then lastly, we always get this question a lot, but recordings will be sent out afterwards. So whether you're attending live or not, these will be sent out and shared. It's a shareable link. So if you're able to attend, but you have team members who would like to view this as well, this recording will be emailed and available for all. So without further ado, I am really thrilled to introduce you to Michael Fulwiler, coming to do his presentation with us, speaking on mental health marketing in the age of AI. So Michael is, he's just an expert marketer in the mental health space in particular. He has, I've been following him for quite a few years. I think we met probably 3 or 4 years ago. And honestly, I've probably learned more from Michael in digital and content marketing in general, but specifically in the mental health I've connected to in the space. He really is an incredible human, but also just very knowledgeable and has a lot of value and insight to bring. He helped lead the marketing efforts with the Gottman Institute for close to a decade, but he's also coached and advised practices, behavioral health companies from across the country. So just has a really fascinating perspective on this topic, and I think there's just a lot that we can all learn from him. So without further ado, I will hand it off to you, Michael.
Thanks, Barrett. Thanks, Katie, for having me. Thanks to folks who are here, giving an hour on your Wednesday. It really means a lot. And everyone who's watching the recording, thanks for tuning in. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, can you see this? Cool. As Barrett said, I want this to be interactive and fun. A lot of webinars aren't that fun. So would love to hear from you. It makes it a lot more fun for me as the presenter, if I'm engaging with you as the audience, also that you're not just listening to me talk for an hour, which no one wants to do. So as you have questions that come up over the next hour, please drop them in the Q&A. direct questions to the Q&A. It's just easier to filter that way, and then we'll kind of ask you to drop some responses in the chat as well, just to make sure that you're still awake and not taking a nap. So this this topic is something I've talked about a lot. I love talking about content marketing, specifically mental health content marketing, which we're going to talk about what that means. This spin, though, is new. So this is the first time I'm actually running through this particular deck on mental health marketing in the age of AI. So AI is something that you're probably hearing a lot about. It's very much a buzzword, but the reality is that marketing and content marketing in particular has really changed a lot in the last 4 or 5 years, and especially the last few years with ChatGPT and people now using AI to create content. And we're going to talk about what all of that means. So I'll just run through this quickly. I've been working in the mental health space as a professional marketer for the last almost 15 years. I started a mental health content marketing consultancy. So this is literally what what I do every day, which is why I get so excited to talk about it. I also write a newsletter for therapists. If you're interested, it's called Therapy Marketer. I used to work at Herd. I worked there for the last 3 years, just left. And I, as Barrett mentioned, was at the Gottman Institute before that. So been doing this a long time. So I started at Herd in June of 2022. And within 6 months, we were able to take organic traffic. So this is people who are coming to your website through Google search. This is not paid traffic through Google ads. This is purely organic traffic, basically from no traffic to 50,000 visitors per month within 6 months, which is pretty cool. And the way that we did that was content marketing. And I'll caveat this by saying this was 3 years ago. And as I mentioned, content marketing, Google search specifically, has changed a lot, especially with AI previews. You might have heard about GEO, which is generative engine optimization, versus SEO. We're going to talk about what that means. But what I'm going to share with you, and you'll walk away with, is really a playbook of how we were able to do that, that you will be able to implement kind of in your own business or practice. My assumption here is most folks here are practicing therapists, whether in private practice or in group practice. Could you just drop in the chat and let me know if you're a therapist? What kind of therapist? What do you do if you're not a therapist? Would be helpful to know too. Maybe there's some other marketers or folks here would be happy, or just would be helpful for me to know. If you could just navigate over to the chat, I'll just keep an eye on that. All right, looks like some folks are typing. Also see some familiar names here. Violet, hi. Tony as well. Nice to see you here. Great. So solo private practice, that's great. So most of this will be tailored towards therapists and private practice, but will be applicable really to any business in the mental health space. So we're going to talk about what content marketing is. When people think about content marketing, I think historically, they think about publishing blog posts or posting on social media or writing emails. And right here, right, it's like we just publish blog posts and we wait for people to come to our website and we wait for leads to come in and potential clients to fill out our consultation form. But that's not exactly how it works. I wish it was that easy, but there's much more to content marketing. When it comes to mental health content, what are best practices that we need to be following to ensure that we're not causing harm to clients and potential clients? We'll talk about that. Big question of the day, should you be using AI, and how should you be using AI to generate content, to distribute content? What is the role of AI today in content marketing? I mentioned this GEO. So what's SEO versus GEO? We're going to talk about that. And then as promised, I'm going to share a content marketing playbook that I've used now at the Gottman Institute and at Herd, and I use with my consulting clients as well. So I'd love to, before we get into what is content marketing, I'd love for folks to drop just a 1 in the chat if you're doing some form of content marketing today in your business. So if you're publishing blog posts, if you're posting on social media, if you have an email newsletter, if you're doing any kind of content marketing, would love for you to just drop a 1 in the chat, and drop a 2 if you're not, but you're hoping to. Thanks, Barrett. Checkpoint does great content marketing, by the way. All right, a couple twos. Oh, mostly twos. Interesting. Okay, good. So this may be new information for some folks. So first, I like to ground us in what is content marketing. So this definition of content marketing comes from Joe Pulizzi. I probably butchered that. Joe Pulizzi is like an OG in the content marketing world. He wrote this book called Content Inc., which is a book that I read when I first started in marketing, probably 15 years ago. If you're interested in content marketing, highly recommend. It's a great book. He now runs the Content Marketing Institute, which is like this whole organization for content marketing. So I'm going to read this, and we're just going to call out a few key words here in this definition. So content marketing is a strategic marketing approach, okay, focused on creating and distributing valuable, relevant, and consistent content to attract and retain a clearly defined audience. Okay, so the content that you're creating, it needs to be valuable for your target audience. So as a therapist, that is your ideal client or who you're trying to attract to your practice, right? So it needs to provide them with some value. We're going to talk about that more in a second. It needs to be relevant to them. So if you have a particular audience that you're trying to reach, say you want to market or create content for teenagers, the content needs to be relevant to teenagers. And if it's not relevant to them, it's not going to resonate, right? And then it also needs to be consistent. So if you're just posting on social media every once in a while, or you send an email newsletter infrequently, right? It's not consistent. It's not going to be effective. Okay. Attract and retain a clearly defined audience. So audience is a big part of this, which we're going to talk about. And ultimately drive profitable customer action. So there needs to be some action that people are taking from your content, right? Otherwise, it's not going to be helping your business. And so as a therapist, that could be driving people from social media to your website, or maybe if they're on your website, it's driving them to download maybe a piece of content. Maybe it's a free checklist or PDF that you have. So now you have their email address. Maybe if you have an email list, maybe it's encouraging them to sign up for a webinar that you're hosting. And maybe at that webinar, you have a special offer, or maybe it's even just as straightforward as booking a consultation with you, or even booking their first session. When we think about content marketing, I'm going to just distill that definition down into this like very simple framework that content marketing is a value exchange. And so before we ask people for money, before we ask for cash value for our services or the products we sell, the idea is we have to provide them with something valuable first, right? If we just ask people to buy something from us and we haven't provided value to them yet, they're going to be less likely to buy because they don't trust us. They don't know who we are. We haven't like provided any value to them. So, why would they give us their money? So the more use value that you can provide to your target audience, as a therapist, to your ideal client, they're more likely to trust you, think of you as an expert, want to hire you as their therapist. This is the biggest mistake that I see really anyone make, but therapists in particular, is they're not providing value in their content. And so I meet with them and they say, Michael, I've been posting on Instagram for a year. I've written 500 blog posts. I'm not seeing it. It's not working. Content, it's not working for me. And then I look at it and I say, well, it's kind of mostly promotional and we're not providing a lot of value, or it's not really that helpful. And people say, oh, okay. So think about it. Is this providing value? And then it's also a great litmus test, right? If it's not providing value, then we probably shouldn't be producing it. Whether it's providing value or not depends on who you're trying to create content for and who you're trying to market to, which we'll talk about. I won't spend a lot of time here, but mental health content in particular, there's some best practices that we need to be following. The first one, really just sticking to your expertise. As a therapist, you probably have a specialization or a niche or background or particular modality that you practice. Maybe you do DBT, maybe you do EMDR, maybe you work with teenagers, right? So sticking to your lane and what you know, I think is very important. They'll also just help to establish your credibility. Do no harm, right? So we're not creating content that is possibly triggering for some people. right? We see this with more sort of like paid ads that they're like, they're not in good taste and could potentially be harming clients as well. So I want to make sure we're not doing that. And then in general, that we're following our like code of ethics, as a licensed therapist when it comes to content marketing. So we're not engaging in dual relationships with clients on social media, right? If clients are responding to our email newsletter, like we're not engaging in email communication with clients that's not HIPAA compliant. So just sticking within your code of ethics in general is always a good idea, but as it relates to content marketing specifically, we want to not put our license at risk, right? I just talked for like 15 minutes. So any questions so far, anything that's coming up for anyone, or just any thoughts that you would like to share? Any reactions?
Not seeing
Great.
anything just yet.
Means I'm super clear. Okay. Okay, so big question. Should you use AI to generate content? This is my opinion. I'm going to back it up with some supporting evidence. My take on this is that no, you should not use AI to generate content. And I'm going to tell you why. The first is something called the uncanny valley. And so this goes back, I'm going to just make sure that okay. So the uncanny valley is a phenomenon that was first coined by a Japanese roboticist in the 1970s. And what he found in studying robotics is that with robots in particular, the more like realistic and human a robot is, the more people trust them, which is interesting. So like the more real they is, the more they're accepted. But once they get to be almost human, they start to sort of feel like weird. And they're like, oh, like this is like, it's almost like too real. And I don't really like this. So there's like this sort of uncanny valley where you get to a certain point of like realism and then it drops off. If you look up uncanny valley, something you'll see is the movie The Polar Express, if you've ever seen it. It's like CGI and it's like looks real, but it's also like it's just sort of weird. Like some of the expressions and like they just sort of look like deadpan. And it's sort of when people watch that movie, they have like this very sort of visceral reaction to like, oh, that makes me very uncomfortable. There's like these people just like look off. So the argument here is that if you're using AI to create content, like people can tell that it's AI generated usually, right? Like it just doesn't sound right. And so if you're using it to create content, I think people can tell and it just doesn't feel authentic. Now, if you're going to use AI to create, say, a first draft of content, and then you edit it to be in your own voice, that's a little bit different. The other argument that I've heard here is that if you're using AI, say you're using ChatGPT to write your LinkedIn posts or your blog posts, someone else is probably also using ChatGPT to write a LinkedIn post or blog post on that same topic, right? So now your content like isn't really differentiated and it really doesn't have like your point of view, for example. And so as we get to SEO, and we'll talk about it in a minute, having like a unique perspective, a unique point of view becomes really important in standing out, right? Because otherwise, if everyone is just using AI to create content, then all content is the same and then you're not going to stand out. The second sort of data point here, I guess it is a data point, is that there was an experiment run by a website called SE Ranking, which I think is search engine ranking. They were curious to research and sort of look into if we just publish AI generated content, would it rank on Google search? And so they published 2,000 AI generated articles over a period of time. And what they found was initially, when they published these articles, these blog posts on their website, they saw some initial traction on Google search, right? So people searching for certain keywords, their articles were showing up. But within 3 months, every single one of those 2,000 articles that they published that were AI generated disappeared from Google search. And so what that suggests is that Google knows when your content, it's like Google's AI knows when content is AI generated. So their algorithm is smart enough to be like, wait a second, this is written by AI. This isn't, something that we want to serve up in search results. So to me, this is like a pretty strong argument for not using AI to create content, especially for SEO, like for your website, if you want to rank on Google. And then on the social media side, like I was talking specifically about written content, but I've started to see more like AI generated videos and people using like AI avatars. And it's just like I sort of get that uncanny valley feeling of like, this is weird. Like I think there's like maybe a use case to use AI video. I was thinking about this, like maybe as a therapist, if you want to show like a demonstration, say of like an intervention, or maybe like if you were a couples therapist and used AI to show like characters having an argument or something like that, like as a way of, maybe it's like better sort of than animation. Like that's maybe a use case I could get behind. But in general, I just think authenticity is super important, especially in mental health content. And sort of the more human it is, the more authentic it is, the better. So this is where I would use AI. So I'm not a huge proponent of using AI to generate content, but I think using AI as a research tool is super helpful. So something that I have done at various points for my own newsletter, which is a marketing newsletter for therapists, is I'll go to the therapist subreddit, or I'll go into therapists Facebook groups that I'm a part of. And I'll just look for any questions that are being asked about marketing, because these are actual therapists who have actual questions about marketing. We go back to providing value in your content, right? And so I'm just not looking at like the keyword research and kind of what keywords are ranking. I'm looking at what are the conversations that therapists are actually having on the internet, and how can I use that to come up with ideas for my own content so it answers the questions that they have and it's valuable for them. And so this is a actual sort of like chat GPT conversation that I had and just took a screenshot. So I don't know if you can read this, but the sort of the prompt here is, can you review the therapist subreddit and find the most common questions therapists have about marketing? So I could go on Reddit and I could spend hours searching through Reddit posts about marketing in the therapist subreddit, or I can just ask ChatGPT to do it for me, and it was like instant. So in that sense, like that's pretty cool, right? So it went through a bunch of threads, and then it gave me a summary of the common questions that therapists have about marketing. Great, now I have 10 newsletter topics like that, right? Barrett, I think Checkpoint has like a AI prompt cheat sheet or checklist, right? For marketing, is that correct?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
So we released that earlier this summer, but yeah, it's like 20 core prompts that
Cool.
could be pretty easy to copy and paste. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if you haven't used ChatGPT or like an AI, the biggest difference is like when you're using Google, you're like asking a question, right? So I would say like common questions therapists have about marketing. And then the Google search results would be like articles or like blog posts that other websites have written about the common questions that therapists have about marketing. So it's basically like providing me a list of links that are relevant to my search. Now, AI search is different in that it's conversational, right? So it's basically doing the same thing, but then it's summarizing the results and then giving that back to me as information. So it's a lot easier to do this type of stuff, which, and I'm sort of coming off topic here, but from an SEO perspective, that's also important to keep in mind, right? Because now when people are searching, a lot of informational searches are happening through ChatGPT. People are just going to ChatGPT and searching and looking for information versus on Google. So we also want to make sure that our website is showing up in AI searches. And I'm going to talk about how to do that. Oh, I teed myself up there. Before I move on, any questions about anything I just said?
Not seeing any questions. Yeah.
Great. Drop a 3 in the chat if you're still with me. Oh, there we go. Thanks, Marina. All right, we got a few here. Great. Okay, cool. All right, so before I just jump ahead here, SEO, search engine optimization, right? It's optimizing for search engines like Google so that your website shows up when people search. GEO is a new term which is generative engine optimization. Basically, it's like SEO for AI searches. There's like a lot of conversation in the marketing world that GEO is just sort of like another buzzword. I've also seen SEO now called search everywhere optimization. So like SEO could just be like the blanket term, but it's basically like how do we ensure or how do we optimize that we're showing up in AI searches? I will say that this is all very new. So anyone who claims to be like an expert in GEO, they're probably selling you something. But this is sort of just like when it comes to AI search in particular, here's some best practices to follow. And this comes from Healthy-ish Content, which is a content agency that my friend Derek Flansreich runs. Okay, and so you may have heard of EAT, which is a acronym in the SEO world that stands for expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. So these are things that the Google algorithm looks for in terms of SEO, right? Like, is your content, do you have authority? So in other words, like, are other websites linking to your website? That's an indicator that your website is authoritative. Do you have expertise, right? So does it seem like you know what you're talking about? Do you have like content that is relevant to your target audience? All those types of things. So basically, the takeaway here is with GEO, which is generative engine optimization, the same practices essentially follow, right? Whereas if you're showing up on Google, you're likely to show up in AI searches as well, because the information that AI searches pull is from Google for the most part. So EEAT, there's an extra E on there. That's experience, expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. So those are the things that you want to make sure that your content has and is showing. It's really important for AI kind of search in particular to have content that feels conversational. So it's not super dense. I think tone is also really important here. When we think about like the tone of ChatGPT and AI, it's very conversational. I think in general, it's a good idea that if you're writing articles or blog posts, now we're talking about SEO in particular, right? That it's conversational, it's informal, it's not super jargony. Just that your content is structured and clean. You have headings, subheadings, kind of just like best practices for readability, but also for SEO as well. If you can have visuals like images and graphics, that's also a really great thing. I recognize like at Herd or at Gottman, we had a whole marketing team, right, that was creating content. And for most folks here, this could look like maybe just getting on Canva. And if I'm writing, like, say, a blog post, I just have like a really simple diagram, something like that. Increases the likelihood that you're going to show up. Snack readers. So these are people who skim. So typically what you'll see now in content, kind of this is like a newer sort of recommendation, is that at the beginning of your blog post or article, you have like a summary. So these are like the 3 things that we talk about or are we going to talk about. And at the end, there's like a takeaways section as well. And like Google loves that. They love the summary and the takeaways. So as much as you can include those in your articles, the better. And then also just keep your content updated. So Google in particular loves content that feels relevant and up to date. And so that could be, once a year, just going in and making sure, your old blog posts and stuff are updated. I know at Herd this was a big thing because we had a lot of like tax deadlines and, references to things that needed to be updated every year. But in Google search results and AI search results too, like they tend to prioritize content that feels fresh versus something that was published 5 years ago. Excuse me. So that's all things you can do on site to optimize to show up in AI search results. So when someone's searching in ChatGPT, this could look like, best therapists in Chicago or Chicago therapist. What are the best therapists that treat anxiety in Chicago? Whatever, right? So like someone could be searching that on ChatGPT or using an AI search tool. So just making sure that like we're optimizing our content on our website for those searches as well. And then just a few recommendations for things you can do off of your website. And so I would say, like, as much as you can guest on podcasts, do webinars, kind of put yourself out there in ways where you're positioning yourself as an expert, and other websites are linking back to your website. That's always really helpful. I found guesting on podcasts actually to be sort of like a hack for getting backlinks, right? Because if you guest on a podcast or you're interviewed on a podcast, that podcast is probably going to publish the episode on their website, and then they're going to link back to your website in the bio or episode description. So you're basically getting a backlink. So every time you do that, especially if it's like a high authority website, that's a good way to get a backlink to your own website, which is good. And then I would say, as much as so this is kind of, I would say, for larger content teams, but if you're publishing any sort of first-party data, that's always really great. At Herd, every year, we published what we call the Financial State of Private Practice report. We surveyed therapists about their finances. We put out this industry report, and that got picked up by the media. It got cited in other people's blog posts. Like, that was a great way to get a lot of citations. And this is something that I've seen, is that with SEO, like Google really values backlinks, because for Google, if there's websites that are considered high authority, they get a lot of traffic, and they're linking back to your website, they consider your website, oh, they must be high authority too, right? For GEO, for AI searches, what I've seen is it's like backlinks are important, but also just like mentions are important. So if ChatGPT, they sort of find that you're mentioned on Reddit or you're mentioned in other places, even if there's not a backlink, it sort of bumps you up in their algorithm. And there was actually, I think it was like someone who runs like a coding boot camp or coding school. I don't know if you saw this recently, but they were just like spamming Reddit basically in order to like make sure that their Code Academy was the one who showed up in AI search results as like the best one, and they got caught doing that. So don't do that. But I would say, like, as much as you can be sort of like referenced and talked about other places, communities, things like that, the better. Because if ChatGPT sees that you're coming up a lot, they'd be like, oh, this person, they must know what they're talking about. Okay, cool. So now I want to give you something a little bit more tangible, excuse me. So this is a 5-step playbook that I use for content marketing. You can use in your practice. The first one, going back to our definition of content marketing, is a clearly defined audience, right? So a lot of people will jump ahead to just creating content. And when I meet with therapists, they'll ask me, should I be posting on LinkedIn? And I'll say, well, who are you trying to reach, right? If you're trying to reach founders and executives, yeah, LinkedIn is a great place probably to post content, right? But if your audience is, I don't know, folks who are retired, maybe, like, I don't know, are they on LinkedIn? So I would say, like, defining your audience is step one. This is not just in content marketing, but this is in marketing in general. Audience first. I can't say that enough. If there's just one thing that you take away from this session, it's really clearly define your audience. It also just makes everything easier, right? Because when we come to actually creating content, if you don't know who you're creating content for, like, what are you going to create content about? But if you start with your defined audience, it becomes a lot easier because you have more clarity on the questions that they have, the problems that they have that you can help them solve. This is something that's a little bit counterintuitive, but I love to include this. When I talk to therapists, the response generally about niching down and having a sort of clearly defined audience is like, well, I'm limiting the amount of clients that I could potentially see, right? Like, why would I do that? That's not a very good business strategy. Like, why would I have like a smaller audience than a larger audience? But the reality is that the more you focus and narrow your audience, the bigger your audience gets. The other way to just frame this is like, if you're trying to market to everyone, if you're trying to create content for everyone, you're not going to really create content for anyone, right? Because it's not going to resonate with anyone. It's like too general and too broad. But if you're the person, say me, who creates like marketing content for therapists, like, it's so specific, right? But now my audience is therapists, which is 750,000, 800,000 just in the US, right? So what I'll say here is like, yes, there needs to be some sort of like market size that's reasonable. Like there's this quote from Bob Iger. I'm probably going to butcher it, but basically he was like, the quote is something around like, you don't want to be the sort of like best violin oil salesman in the world because they only sell so many per year or whatever. Like there needs to be like some sort of like demand for what you're offering. But in general, I would say the more specific you can be, the kind of bigger your audience gets in terms of who you're going to reach. And this is just a thought exercise. So when we think about Herd is an accounting software company specifically for therapists, right? And so if you think about this like an onion, it's like accounting software for everyone. So we just do accounting software. Okay, so like if we go a layer deeper than that, we're creating accounting software for SMBs, which is small and medium-sized businesses. And if we go a layer below that, it's wellness professionals, which is still kind of broad. And then it's therapists, and then it's therapists in private practice. And then if we get even more specific, this gets into our like ideal client profile. It's therapists in private practice who are earning over a certain amount of money because then they actually need our financial services to help manage their bookkeeping and taxes. And so you can see like you can get more and more and more specific. Now, I would say even in like the last year or so, Herd has actually expanded. And if you look at the Herd website today, it's therapists and wellness practitioners. So they actually have increased their audience as the company has grown. So you can do that as well. Like just because you start specific doesn't mean that you have to stay so narrow and specific. But if you're just starting, I would say that's a good practice. And then this is just a simple framework. You help. Who do you help? What are they struggling with? And what do you help them achieve? And so this is kind of in general, when we think about like our niche, this can be helpful. If you look at my LinkedIn, actually, I think my LinkedIn like tagline is, I help mental health companies grow through content marketing, right? So it's basically like a version of this. So if I'm a CEO of a mental health company and I read that, like, yeah, I want to grow and I don't want to spend a ton of money on ads. So yeah, I want to talk to this guy, right? So being clear about who you serve, the problem that you're helping them solve, and what you help them to achieve in this last part is really important. I think some people just kind of stop here. Like, I work with anxious women. It's like, okay, what do they struggle with? What do you help them achieve? What's the outcome that you can help them deliver? And that's what you put, right on your homepage. Okay, so once we've defined our ideal client, excuse me, that we're creating content for, before we even create content, we need to nail our messaging, which is how we're speaking to that audience. And this gets back to authenticity. And I think this is relevant in this conversation because authenticity is really relatability. I think when someone is, and this is especially important for therapists, right? Like when someone is looking for a therapist, it's a very like human and emotional decision that they're making to pick you over someone else. I think most people who are looking for a therapist, they're looking at your website, they're looking at your Psychology Today, maybe they're looking at your social media. And if you can relate to them through your content, through authenticity, I think they're going to be much more likely to trust you. And I know this also feels like, I don't know if counterintuitive, maybe it's like a little bit of a step away from kind of traditional, sort of like the way that we think about therapists as being like, we're a blank slate. We don't talk about ourselves. We don't talk about our beliefs, like that kind of stuff. So obviously like whatever you're comfortable with kind of in the way that you practice, but I would say in general, authenticity can be a huge unlock for therapists. And this is why I think using AI to create content becomes problematic because it's not authentic. Okay, so step 3, we're now ready to finally create content. So this is where a lot of people start, and then I have to back up and say like, okay, who are we creating content for? How are we speaking? What is our sort of tone of voice? As like a brand, that's an exercise you have to define your messaging. I would say like as a therapist, especially if you're in private practice, like your messaging and your voice is like who you are. Like I have a friend, Patrick Casal, And like, he just curses a lot. That's just like who he is. And his website like has curse words on it. And like, that's great. You know, a lot of therapists wouldn't do that, but he does that because that's who he is. And so I think that gets back to that relatability thing, right? Like, someone who would be offended by their therapist cursing, like, is probably not going to relate to him, but that's probably not his ideal client anyway. So when you think about content creation, so this is social media, this is SEO content for your website, YouTube, email content. We want to make sure that we're delivering what I would call unique, consistent value. So UCV is the acronym. This goes back to that definition that we talked about, right? You see some of these words starting to repeat themselves. And so unique, how is like the content that you're creating different than the content that other people are creating? It's really hard to be unique when you're using AI to create your content, because anyone can use AI to create their content, right? So your content needs to be like different in some way. I would say the best way to be unique in your content is just to be yourself. Like, a lot of my content that I'm creating for my newsletter is just like things that I'm learning and my kind of opinion about things. And it's just sort of like, this is something I saw, right? And so it's different because it's me and it's sort of my perspective on something. It needs to be consistent. I think this is like probably I don't want to say the most important thing, but very important. There's like a saying that it's like A plus consistency beats B plus content every time or something. Like, your content still needs to be valuable, but if you have like really great, outstanding, high quality content, but you're just inconsistent with it, like, it's going to get beat by content that is good, but more consistent. A good example of this is I talk to therapists who tell me, I love your Tuesday newsletter. And I say, oh, thank you. It's not therapy marketer to them. It's just the Tuesday newsletter, because every Tuesday for 5 years, it's in their inbox, right? So like, the consistency of that, people like just look forward to it. They expect it. I'm sure if like I didn't send it, which I haven't not sent a newsletter in 5 years, like if I didn't, I'd probably get emails like, are you okay? Like, I didn't get my newsletter today. So there's something to be said about like just continuing to show up. And I think what consistency does is it keeps you top of mind. The goal of marketing and content marketing is not to get someone to buy right now. It's to get them to buy when they're ready to buy. And there's stats that I've seen that's like 95%, which feels like a made up number, of your like target audience is not ready to buy from you right now. You know, maybe someone isn't looking for a therapist today, but they follow you on social media or they've seen you a couple of times. And then when they are actually looking for a therapist, you're top of mind for them. Or Barrett, maybe they're not looking for an EHR today, but in 6 months from now, they're wanting to switch. Or they have a friend who's going into private practice and they're asking them for a recommendation. And they say, oh, well, yeah, I'm on this newsletter. I follow this guy on LinkedIn and they seem great. So it's about really being top of mind, and that's what consistency does. And then value, right? So it's like, has to create worth or value for your target audience. Typically with value, we think about educational value, right? So we're providing education that answers a question that they have or helps to solve a problem that they're having. But value can also be entertainment value. Like, it can just be like funny memes and videos, and like that's okay too, especially for social media, right? Like, it doesn't have to be just educational and serious. Entertainment is also okay, especially for YouTube and social media. So the takeaway there is like, it doesn't just need to be educational to be valuable. And then again, this is a really good sort of litmus test, right? Of like, okay, I'm writing a newsletter, I'm going to post on social media, whatever. Like, is it unique? Has it been consistent? Is it actually creating value? Someone asked about, Tony asked about like how often to post, weekly, bi-weekly. The reality is it doesn't really matter. I think like the most important thing is being consistent. How often? I think it just depends on the channel, right? So like, this is just sort of like a general cadence at Herd. Again, we had like a big team, so it's not, you know, more than just me, but we tended to think about it as like, you know, every day we're posting something on social. 2 times a week, we're publishing an article. Once a week, we have a podcast. Once a week, we have a newsletter that like shares that podcast as well as the articles that we posted. Once a month, we publish like a longer form piece of content, like an explainer guide. And then once a quarter, we publish more of like a tool. I know Checkpoint has a lot of great tools that they're putting out as well, something that's a little bit more interactive. And then we do an annual report. So we think about it more as like, what are we doing every day, every week, every month, every quarter, every year? We want to be careful, though, that we're not just doing this to do it, which is I've heard called checkbox marketing, right? It's like we're just kind of checking a box. Like I always post on social media. We need to do this because Michael said I need to post on social media every day. That's not what I'm saying here. If you're providing value and you're doing it every day for your target audience, that's great. But don't just do it because that's what someone told you to do, right? Like I think that there needs to be intention behind what you're doing. And I think the intention is creating value, going back to that value exchange, right? Like, am I creating value for my target audience? And then in general, I would just say like, do less, spend more time on fewer things, focused on impact. I've heard it's really more about resonance than about reach, right? Like we love to look at engagement numbers and vanity metrics of like, oh, I reached 2 million people on LinkedIn. It's like, okay, but did you resonate with those people? Do they want to take action, right? Like, and so I even think like impact is really about resonance. Resonance is really like, if it resonated with them, it was probably valuable or spoke to like something that was relevant to them. This is just a list of different content examples, things that we've done, that we did at Herd, I mentioned kind of like those explainer guides. There's some cool like AI like ways to create tools now. I don't know if this is as relevant for therapists, but you can create like calculators and certain things that are a little bit more interactive to put on your site. Lovable is a website that I've been seeing more lately, where you can basically create sort of like tools and even kind of like almost like little mini products using AI, so you don't have to know how to code. So that's kind of good. Maybe like a tool for you could be like maybe some sort of really basic questionnaire or quiz or assessment or something like that. Okay, we have about 10 minutes left. So a lot of people just like start with 3 and then they stop with 3. So they create content and then they're like, okay, I created the content, but it's not working. But they're not distributing it, right? So like content distribution is half the battle, and a lot of people just stop at content creation. So there's this guy, his name's Ross Simmons, and this is his tagline, is create once, distribute forever. So the idea is like, if you create one piece of content, just keep distributing it and redistributing it and resharing it. Like people they write a blog post, they spend hours writing this really fantastic article and they share it once. It's like, share it again. The likelihood is most people who follow you probably didn't even see it when you shared it the first time. So, if you have a blog post, you have an article, you have a tool that you've created, you have a resource, like share it more than once. Repurpose it. This webinar is a great example. I think I have a graphic about podcasting where it's like, we do this one webinar, right? So this is one asset. It's one piece of content. We can cut clips from it. We can write it up as a blog post. We can share it in a newsletter, right? Like we can distribute it and repurpose it in a bunch of different ways. And that's what I'm always trying to do from a content marketing perspective, is like, what can I do once and then repurpose a lot of times, instead of just trying to like do a lot of things over and over, if that makes sense. I share this just to show like distribution channels. I think when people think about content distribution and like sharing content, they sort of think of like Instagram or LinkedIn, or just maybe I'll share it with my email list, right? But there's actually like a lot of channels, sharing your content on Reddit, if you want to do that, I think is great. There's also like opportunities to share content like offline, in person. And I think also paid is a little bit, I would say, less relevant here, but as you become, larger, there's opportunities to distribute via paid like ads as well. I think Facebook groups is another one that's like pretty underrated. Like if you're writing articles, if you're a therapist, like sharing, resources in Facebook groups is great. Okay, so this is just a visual of like kind of what I was just talking about, right? So like if you have a podcast, or even if you are just a guest on a podcast, like one podcast episode, one sort of 45-minute to 1 hour sort of activity turns into all these other pieces of content, right? You can create an article, a YouTube video, a newsletter, social media posts. So there's a ton that you can do here in terms of repurposing. I think the takeaway is like a lot of people just leave a lot of kind of like, I don't want to say money on the table, but they're sort of like, I don't know, they're not getting the most out of their content. Okay, this is another framework, and I'll share the slides here too. So I know I'm going quick, but this is from a great newsletter. So if you're a newsletter person, if you like email, definitely look up MKT1 newsletter. It's a marketing newsletter. It's more for like startups, but I think it's still helpful. And they have this framework for anytime you're creating content, there's this GACCS like framework, and you should be able to like answer. The premise is you should be able to answer these questions about any content you're creating. And if you're like not sure, then it's, probably shouldn't be spending time to create it. But distribution, this is basically like why I'm showing this is distribution is part of the content creation process, right? So we're thinking about before we create something, how will this be distributed versus I wrote this article, now how am I going to share it? Okay, and then this is a bonus tip here. So distribution, you can distribute your content, but other people can distribute your content for you. And that's like a huge unlock. And so something that I've learned is that the people who share your content usually aren't the people who you're targeting, which is interesting. It's the people who share a target audience with you. So when I was at Gottman and we were creating content for couples, parents, people in relationships, therapists who worked with those populations would share our content. So then that would help us reach more people, right? And so think about like when I'm creating something, who would share this? Is like another way to think about distribution, if that makes sense. Okay, and then last one here, optimization. So we don't need to go super like, in depth here, but what I would say is like, just kind of have a general idea of like how your content's performing. Are there certain topics that are going back to resonance, right? Resonating more than others? And if so, like double down on those. This is just like metrics that we can use. I don't want to get bogged down in reporting. So I think this is actually less important, but I would say just like in general, the takeaway here would be like, if there's a certain topic or even content format that tends to work well for your audience over another, like double down on that. And I think content marketing and marketing in general is really about like experimentation, just like try different stuff, see what works. Yeah, and then just double down on what's working. So the example here is when I was at Gottman, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which is like the 4 predictors of divorce. It's like a very well-known theory, I guess, topic. And we wrote like an article about it that became like the #1 search result on Google. And then I was like, okay, well, what else can I do with this? So I worked with this like animation company. I probably could do this with AI now, actually. And we made this like video on the 4 horsemen on the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. It's I don't know, it's 2 minutes long. Put it on YouTube. This was published in 2014. I don't know when I took this, but if you look now, it's probably more. It's like over 1 million views on YouTube, right? So it's like clearly this topic is like resonating. What are other sort of ways that we can get more like juice out of the squeeze here? That's what I was looking for earlier. Like, and I've had like people. This was a few years back, but like I would have people like send me pictures from their psychology 101 class in college where their professor showed this video in their college class to explain the 4 horsemen, right? So like going back to the shares sort of concept, it was like 4 people who were in relationships which is being shared by like psychology professors to teach about Psych 101. So like that was pretty cool. So, we don't have like the luxury, right, of being a Gottman level type of content brand, but just the point is find the topics that really are resonating with your audience and just double down on them. Another example is when I was at Herd, I learned pretty quickly, anytime we talked about tax write-offs or tax deductions for therapists, there was like a ton of engagement in that topic, because who doesn't want to save money on their taxes, right? So we wrote like a guide on tax write-offs. We had a tax deduction cheat sheet that was downloaded like 5,000 times. We had a tax write-offs webinar series. Like, we did a ton of content around a particular topic because that's we found was resonating really with our audience. So figure out what that is for you. Whew. All right. I know we didn't leave a lot of time here, but if there's any questions, happy to field a few. Also, I'll just drop my email. I think it's on a slide here as well, but if there's any questions that you have. Oh, also, I do have this as well. I threw this in here. So I offer 60-minute marketing consultation calls. So if you just want to set up a call and chat, you're able to do that. I put in like a special link here that has $50 off. So typically it's $300 for the hour, but this would be $250. And it's just for this this group here. So certainly no pressure, but if you're interested in setting up a call, you can just scan that, and then maybe I'll have Barrett or Katie send that link out as well. But cool. Also, just happy to answer any questions right now if people have 1 minute.
Thanks. Yeah, so if you guys have any questions, feel free to post them in the Q&A. Let's see. So we have one on if a clinic only has, say, like 2 hours a week to market, what single content format would you recommend starting with?
Oh, man. Great question. I would say if resources are limited, I would question whether content is the best marketing channel, to be honest. Like, content requires like consistent time. Like, it's I think more work than people think, right? Because you have to create the content, you have to distribute the content. I would say like if resources are limited, I would probably invest more in like building your referral network and kind of spend more time in like that type of outreach than actual content creation. I would say like maybe then the content that you're creating is for those types of kind of like network building activities. So maybe I'm creating like a flyer, or I'm creating like a piece of content or something that's helpful. Like I talked to a therapist who created like I don't remember what the topic was, like an ADHD checklist or something, and then they'd like drop that off at university counseling centers. So it was like something that was valuable, it was like helpful, but then it also was like marketing content for their practice. So I would say that's probably where I would invest my time, would be trying to like build your referral network with content if possible.
Yeah, it was like we had another similar question about where you would, if you were just starting out, like where would you start so you don't get overwhelmed and kind of pick one thing to go with. Yeah.
So the other thing I would say kind of about authenticity is like pick a content format that feels authentic to you. Like, I don't like, believe it or not, I don't love being on video. So like you won't probably see me creating like Instagram reels of myself talking. So like I'm not really like on Instagram or TikTok, but I like to write. And I was like an English lit major. And so like that's why I write a newsletter. So like that's sort of the lane that I'm in, because like I just enjoy it. And the thing about content too with consistency is like if you're going to do content marketing, if you're going to try to grow your audience, like it's something that you're probably going to need to do for like 5 years. Like I'm sort of 5 years in of writing a newsletter. Now I have like enough subscribers where I can have sponsors and it's sort of become its own business, but like you're just gonna have to do it for a long time. And so I would say like where I would start is probably like start with what feels like enjoyable to me, whether it's, writing videos, creating graphics, whatever. I would start there. But then I would also ask like, well, where is your audience that you're trying to reach? Where do they hang out online, or where do they spend their time? Where do they go to? I think it's listen, learn, and spend their time. Those are kind of the questions I would ask.
And I do know we're just slightly over on time, but there is one more question. And I think it might, if you have any tips on it, I think a lot of other people probably feel like they're in the same boat. The question was from Violet, and it says, for a small practice for like 10 to 20 practitioners, we're in an underserved market, so they don't have issues with referrals. But is there something they can do to, or something they can focus on to attract like employees that's
Great question.
different than LinkedIn and ZipRecruiter?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Violet. So I've talked to a bunch of group practice owners, and it seems like the consensus is that the best way actually to hire therapists for a group practice is referrals or recommendations from therapists who are already working at your practice. And so when you like put out a job listing, say on LinkedIn or ZipRecruiter, you're just getting like a ton of unqualified candidates. But and I don't know if maybe that is too simplistic, but like there's probably therapists who work at your practice who worked at an agency or worked somewhere else with the therapist who like they really liked. And so maybe offering like a referral bonus to your employees, like, hey, if we hire someone that you refer, we'll, pay you $500 or whatever. That's something that I know a lot of like tech companies do. So that would be if you haven't done that, that would be my recommendation, is actually try to see if anyone who is currently working at the practice could refer someone.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. I'm just going to drop a couple of links there in the chat if you want to know more, either about Michael and his marketing company or about Checkpoint. But yeah, again, this will be recorded, so we'll definitely be sure to get that out to everyone. Yeah, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining.
Great. Thanks, everyone.